Great. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Rin Tara. I'm currently blind. My name is Rin Tara. I'm a staff attorney here at the Utton Center, and I had the great privilege of spending the last 16-ish months putting together, with the help of many people in this room and many people not in this room, putting together the what kind of amounts to a documentary on how water moves through the Rio Grande from the Colorado border down to the Texas border. This project started as a CASC grant from the Climate Adaptation Science Center, a group within the USGS, gives out grants to talk about climate change in all parts of the country. You can imagine this grant was received during the last administration. We had a couple of years to fulfill it. So we put together this webinar to help people understand what's happening on the river, although looking at the people in this room, a lot of you know exactly what's happening on the river. So we're going to show you the video. It's about 55 minutes, and then a bunch of the interviewees from the video are going to be our panelists. They will come sit in the hot seats, and you will have half an hour to ask them the hardest questions you can think of. So thank you everyone for being here. We're recording it on Zoom, so while the video's playing, if you have to take a phone call or something, if you don't mind just stepping out. And then remember that we do practice leave no trace here at the Utton Center, so any trash that you create, make sure you take out of the room with you, and then there's a trash can just outside to your right, as well as recycling. Does anyone have any questions before we get started? Splendid.
At 8 o'clock this morning, this was a dry riverbed. It's now 10:44 and it is flowing about 2,500 cubic feet per second right now.
The Utton Center is a research and public service project of the state legislature, where we focus primarily on water issues in New Mexico and across the Southwest. The Rio Grande is a river that's almost 1,900 miles long. It's utilized by municipalities, by a lot of agriculture, by many indigenous communities. And hopefully the information that's provided in the rest of this video will bring us closer together and incite more cooperation along the river.
The Rio Grande flows from the Colorado-New Mexico border, 470 miles through the state of New Mexico to the Texas-New Mexico border. As the river traverses the entire length of the state of New Mexico, it travels through a variety of ecotomes and geosystems.
From the state line of Colorado down to where we are, the Rio Grande is a very steep gradient river, flowing through a basalt gorge created by the breach of a natural dam up in Colorado. That cataclysm caused a lot of erosion, and the river is cut to where it is right now. A few miles downstream of here, the river will become a consistently flat gradient stream, but up here where it's very steep gradient, the trout fishing is amazing.
The river flattens out as it flows from Taos through northern New Mexico and eventually to Cochiti Reservoir, which is the beginning of the Middle Rio Grande.
Well, today we're at Cochiti Lake, which is on the Cochiti Pueblo Reservation. And the Rio Grande system where we're sitting at is on the northern edge of the Middle Rio Grande region. Then it goes down south.
So we're standing next to the Rio Grande in the heart of Albuquerque. This is what we call here in New Mexico the Middle Rio Grande, or New Mexico's Middle Rio Grande. The river opens up into this valley that we live in at a place called Cochiti. In the time before humans built dams and levees, this was a free-flowing river. The natural flow of this river would be a big high pulse of water in the summer. With the snowmelt, would flood across the valley floor, gently spread out a mile or more toward the mountains from where we're standing and all the way up against the bluffs that are beyond me here. So what is now the city of Albuquerque?
From the city of Albuquerque, the Rio Grande flows south through the Pueblo of Isleta and into Valencia County.
Here we're about a mile away from the Rio Grande, just to the east of us, which is the Isleta Reach here in Valencia County.
South of Valencia County, the Rio Grande flows through Socorro County, which is rural and full of commercial agriculture. Below the commercial agriculture area within Socorro County is an area colloquially known as the San Marcial Reach, which has little human habitation. The water flows through this area and then continues on to Elephant Butte Reservoir.
This behind me is the main channel of the Rio Grande. We're a couple of miles downstream of Percha Dam. This is the Rio Grande Rift, a major continental geologic feature. This reach of the river I think of as running from Elephant Butte Dam to the north of us, down to a little place called Fort Quitman, Texas, down southeast of El Paso. At times and in places, the river recharges the aquifer. Sometimes the aquifer is discharging into the river. It's almost a transparent boundary between the two.
There are a number of tributaries to the Rio Grande in New Mexico. For our purposes, we're going to be focusing on the Rio Chama and the Pecos River. The Rio Chama makes its headwaters in the San Juan Mountains of southern Colorado, just north of the Colorado-New Mexico border. As the snow melts, the water flows from Colorado over the border into New Mexico. The Rio Chama then flows through New Mexico and joins the Rio Grande as a tributary north of the city of Albuquerque.
I'm standing here in Villanueva State Park, downstream of the headwaters for the Pecos River. The Pecos River, which begins in the Sangre de Cristo Mountains of northern New Mexico, flows south through the eastern part of the state and into Texas, where it joins the Rio Grande as a tributary. The upstream portion of the Pecos River flows through Hispanic land-grant communities and Pecos Pueblo. Here in Villanueva State Park, we're near the San Miguel del Bado land grant. South of Santa Rosa, the Pecos River flows into Sumner Lake, which stores water for the Fort Sumner Irrigation District. Downriver of Sumner Lake, the Pecos flows through the Roswell Artesian Basin, an area rich in groundwater. And then it flows into the Carlsbad Valley, where the Carlsbad Irrigation District developed surface water well over a century ago. South of Carlsbad, the Pecos River flows into Texas. Below the state line, the Pecos joins the Rio Grande.
Although people have lived alongside and shepherded the flow of the Rio Grande in New Mexico since time immemorial, the Rio Grande that we see today is a highly managed river that bears little resemblance to the river that people would have seen 500 or 600 years ago, prior to westward expansion. Some of the most dramatic changes to the river occurred only in the past 100 years through the creation of dams, reservoirs, and other diversion structures. These physical changes are directly related to legal frameworks that were created in the early 1900s. These frameworks include reclamation acts and the legal designation of who is entitled to what water, often across state lines, referred to as compacts. The Rio Grande Compact requires Colorado to deliver to New Mexico a certain amount of water based on flows in gauges in Colorado, and then requires New Mexico to deliver to Texas a certain amount of water dependent on gauges in New Mexico. Understanding the ways in which the Rio has been transformed by both physical hands and written words is critically important.
Cochiti Lake was a result of a flood control act that was passed by Congress in the mid-1900s. Initially, Cochiti Pueblo didn't want the lake here, as the Army Corps tried to figure out where best to put a lake along this portion of the Rio Grande system. The lake was established as an earthen-filled dam. It was at the time the biggest earthen-filled dam. It's 5 miles long. It is in a location where the hydrology, it's an alluvial flood system. So when the dam was built and the lake was established, the water then pushed downstream of the dam. It pushed the water table up to create wetlands, and it impacted Cochiti, Pueblo, and our people because we couldn't farm in a wetland area. We couldn't grow corn, our melons, and other traditional crops for many years. And so for the Cochiti people and our history, it's a little bit of a sore spot, and we continue to try to figure out how to manage and work with federal officials and state officials on the stewardship of the lake and what to do with the lake in the future.
The two most important things that changed the flow of the river across the 20th century were levees and dams. One of the most important things that we did here in this stretch of the river, beyond building the physical infrastructure, is building the social infrastructure. It was the creation a century ago of the Middle Rio Grande Conservancy District, what was at that moment a unique government institution in New Mexico that brought together people from a whole bunch of different communities, villages up and down the river, into one sort of cohesive government unit that could undertake the collective action that we needed to manage our relationship with this river. The Middle Rio Grande Conservancy District built those levees. It also did something that we barely notice today, which is dug these long drains alongside the river that lowered the water table in the valley and created a buildable city where we could put farms or subdivisions or businesses at a place that had once been a swamp. The result was a dramatic change in the ecosystem, from a river plain that was wide, that would occasionally have water and water would flow back into the main channel, that had saltgrass marshes and sedges and woody vegetation, to this narrow channel. And in the course of building the narrowed channel, we also created this riparian forest, this riverside bosque that now spans hundreds of miles of river.
The Middle Rio Grande Conservancy District is an offshoot of a long history of irrigation and agriculture in this part of New Mexico. Long before the MRGCD was created, the Puebloan peoples who lived in New Mexico used very similar irrigation structures. When the conquistadores came to New Mexico and saw traditional Pueblo agricultural practices, they implemented their own traditional agricultural practices, commonly called acequias, and tried to introduce European-style agriculture to the land. Under the Middle Rio Grande Conservancy District, some of these acequias are now called ditches, but they all follow the same set of principles related to water sharing in times of shortage. Although acequia users are not the largest consumers of water in New Mexico, they represent a bridge from historical water management methods dating back to time immemorial, all the way to today's modern irrigation methods.
An acequia is a ditch. That's the technical term. Acequia is a ditch. It's como un canal. But let me give you a different understanding though, cultural understanding. Acequias are like vessels. It moved through the understanding that people had about querencia, a deep understanding of the land, and being able to envision systems, hydrological systems, without having all the machinery and all the technology, no? What runs through the acequia, through this vessel? The way we understand that, the spirit of the water. Because remember, water is alive, and water is going to go in and give life. And so when the water comes in, what is an acequia? An acequia is an instrument that is used to carry the spirit of the water that is going to bless our community, so everything can begin and we can have sustenance.
In this reach, we use primarily surface water to irrigate off the Rio Grande through the Middle Rio Grande Conservancy District. Once the water hits my land, once I've turned it on, I have about an hour in order to irrigate for the water. So once it gets about 3/4 of the way across my property, I will then turn off the culvert from where it's actually coming from the New Basin in order for it to then convey the rest of the way.
In New Mexico, agricultural infrastructure ranges from very small structures like ditches or acequias, all the way to large-scale federal water storage and management projects.
In the Rio Grande project, which is a reclamation project authorized by Congress in the early 1900s, we've got two big storage dams. We've got Elephant Butte Dam and Caballo Dam. And it is a sole purpose project, one purpose, and that purpose is irrigation. When the farmers down in southern New Mexico and West Texas and in northern Chihuahua want their water, we order it up for release from the reservoirs. The water is allocated based on how much water we've got in storage up in Elephant Butte and Caballo reservoirs, and how much of that we can get to the diversion points on the river to EBID El Paso number 1, which is our sister district in Texas, and then Mexico. The allocation process is conducted by the two irrigation districts, EBID and El Paso number 1, and the Bureau of Reclamation. Then the Bureau of Reclamation officially sets the allocation based on those discussions.
The Rio Shama contains multiple important reservoirs. Abiquiu Dam, which serves as a flood control and water storage dam for water users in the Middle Rio Grande. El Vado Dam, which is a dam that stores water for irrigators in the Middle Rio Grande Conservancy District to use. And Heron Reservoir serves as a collection area for water for the San Juan Shama project, which is a trans-basin diversion project which moves water from the San Juan River in the Colorado River Basin into the Rio Grande Basin through a complex series of tunnels.
New Mexico's Pecos River deliveries are governed by the Pecos River Compact, which has been a subject of significant litigation between the two states over the last decades. In the late 90s, after the Supreme Court found that New Mexico had been under-delivering Pecos River water, the New Mexico Interstate Stream Commission purchased junior water rights in the Carlsbad Valley and transferred those rights to the Seven Rivers well field. And there they pump groundwater into the Pecos River to ensure compact compliance. The Carlsbad Irrigation District participated in some of the earliest Bureau of Reclamation water infrastructure projects in the U.S. Water for irrigation in this reach is stored in Avalon and Brantley reservoirs.
Flows in the Rio Grande in New Mexico vary widely, as the Rio Grande is primarily fed by snowmelt and some springs. So there would be periods of very high flow and periods of very low flow. Natural flows, unaltered by dams and other man-made structures, are no longer present on the river due to the number of management structures confining and constraining the Rio Grande that exist these days. Some of these structures are intended to prevent flooding and protect human lives and property, while others of these structures are intended to save water for future use. The net result, though, is that there are no truly natural flows on the Rio Grande anymore. Summer rains, commonly referred to as the monsoon season, don't contribute significantly to the overall flows of the Rio Grande in New Mexico.
The flows fluctuate between 200 cubic feet per second at their lowest, and I've seen flows during snowmelt that are around 3,000 and even higher. Very infrequent. They've been much higher in historical past. When I was a youngster, I remember high flows deep into June. When I was paying attention to those flows, that would have been during the 1980s when the river had lots and lots of snow on an annual basis. It wasn't as hot and dry as it is these days.
Water in the Middle Rio Grande flows off of the Sandia Mountains during periods of intense precipitation, but primarily is supplied by dams upstream of the Middle Rio Grande, including Heron Dam, Elvado Dam, Abiquiu Dam, and Cochiti Dam. Flows in this reach of the Rio Grande range from almost 3,000 cubic feet per second all the way down to 0 cubic feet per second. It's important to remember, however, that aside from very occasional precipitation events that will bring water levels above what water managers in the Middle Rio Grande have prescribed, even the high flows are carefully managed. The water allocated from these dam structures is determined based on a complex set of matrices, including Rio Grande compact allocations, entitlements for the 6 Middle Rio Grande pueblos who have prior and paramount rights to the water in the Middle Rio Grande, and the needs of other water users, including irrigators in the Middle Rio Grande Conservancy District and municipalities like the city of Albuquerque. South of the city of Albuquerque, the Rio Grande, in a year with average hydrology and precipitation, will go dry sometime toward the end of irrigation season, somewhere between the Isleta reach of the Rio Grande and San Marcial. This dryness is often persistent or intermittent depending on the precipitation in any given year. This has historically been true of the Rio Grande, which is a desert river that relies heavily on snowmelt and precipitation. However, climate change and increased human use of the river has amplified this problem. The water that flows to irrigators is transported during these low water times in drains along either side of the river. These drains are intended to reduce evaporative losses and ensure that water reaches the water rights holders who rely on it. Around the San Marcial reach, the drains flow into a large ponding area. The Rio Grande then reaches Elephant Butte Reservoir.
So what we did this morning was the first release of the 2025 season from Caballo Reservoir that will now fill this dry 110 miles of river down to Texas for the first time since August of last year, September of last year. This is a very carefully designed release to push the water down as quickly as possible without creating a whole bunch of flooding or anything like that because we pushed too much, but also not shorting the system and having to trickle it out, which is very inefficient. So what we're trying to do is really punch it down there as quickly and efficiently as possible, but not spilling a drop.
The Rio Grande in New Mexico is home to not only a human population, but a massive non-human population, including plants, animals, insects, and countless creatures too small to see that rely on this river for life.
The Rio Grande in this stretch probably harbors white sucker, Rio Grande sucker, Rio Grande chub, a hybrid between rainbow trout and Rio Grande cutthroat trout. That's a native fish to northern New Mexico. The river also supports brown trout, northern pike. I've seen otters down here. I've seen rattlesnakes, lots of rattlesnakes. I've seen herons. I've seen a lot of waterfowl. Ducks and mergansers like it here. I'm not a big songbird expert, but I've seen a lot of songbirds, bighorn sheep, mule deer. Some petroglyphs upstream from where I'm sitting have drawings of the animals that used to use this river heavily. Grizzly bears, deer, elk. There are elk droppings down here, and it's very remote and difficult to get here. So if I was a wild animal, this is where I would live.
The river is not only the lifeblood to us, but it's also the lifeblood to the ecosystem, the riparian area. The ecosystem and the living beings are essential to the sustainability, the resiliency, and all the blessings that are uniquely dependent on that Rio Grande River flow.
We do have multiple species in the river, including endangered species that include the silvery minnow. We also do have an endangered plant, which is the Pecos sunflower. Further south, lower reach Bosque del Apache, the jumping mouse.
There are some endangered or otherwise sensitive species. The big one is the southwestern willow flycatcher, and we do have several nesting habitats up and down the New Mexico portion of the river here, and the yellow-billed cuckoo is generating some interest too. We do not have Rio Grande silvery minnows here. They were basically extirpated from this reach back in the drought of the 50s.
The Rio Chama is designated as a wild and scenic river for a nearly 25-mile stretch. This stretch includes herds of elk, deer, a variety of migratory birds, and a myriad of native plant species that call this stretch of the river home.
From the headwaters to the community of Torero, the Pecos is designated as a wild and scenic river. This reach of the river provides habitat for many species, including the threatened Mexican spotted owl and the endangered northern goshawk, and also is known for incredible biodiversity and a number of endemic species. That means they're only found on the Pecos River. Those include the Pecos sunflower, Pecos gambusia, which is a fish, Pecos blunt-nosed shiner, Pecos springnail, and also the Texas hornshell mussel.
For people living across the state of New Mexico, the Rio Grande means many things. For some, it is a source of livelihood. For others, it is a place of recreation. And for many, it is a place to come home to.
The river here in the gorge is a really popular fishing spot. There are great insect populations, a lot of trout food, beautiful trout. Another recreation use is world-class rafting on a hot day, which they come frequently in this gorge. People like just come and soak in the river. Below here, once the river comes out of the canyon, the river's also used for agriculture. Seeing some corn, a lot of orchards, alfalfa fields. These days, with high alfalfa prices in the dairy industry and the cattle industry, I think that's a crop that a lot of people just go to automatically. A lot of those villages also have cattle that they graze in the mountains, and that feed they grow during the summer sustains their herd over the winter.
The Rio Grande River means a lot to our Pueblo people, especially along the Middle Rio Grande region. Since time immemorial, we've depended upon the water delivery, the surface water delivery for irrigation purposes. In less than 100 years ago, we still relied on the Rio Grande River for our drinking water, cooking water, as well as our household water. When today, it's mostly relied upon for irrigation, but also we rely on the Rio Grande River for cultural and traditional purposes as well throughout the entire year. So as of today, 2025, the Middle Rio Grande Pueblos continued their irrigatable practices and agricultural practices, and a lot of the water that they utilize is prior and paramount water. That is, the Pueblo people have been here since time immemorial and utilize the water for irrigation purposes. And so in today's water context, they have the right as first in line to use the water for that particular type of consumptive use of the water.
It's important to step back in time and think about the communities that have been here before Spanish colonization, before this became part of the United States, to the Pueblo communities that have lived on this valley floor for time immemorial, centuries and centuries and centuries of time. These are communities that lived in high spots near the river, and as the river would rise up and flood, they would be safely above the floodplain, and they would farm on the valley floor where rich soil built up from the annual flooding cycle. That cycle is no more. That was a very difficult river to live with when we wanted to build a city here on the floor of the Rio Grande Valley. So we began changing the river.
People in the metropolitan area of Albuquerque rely on the Rio Grande for drinking water, sanitation, hobby farming, and some small-scale commercial agricultural operations, as well as a community gathering place and a source for ceremony. The Rio Grande, which in turn supports the Bosque, one of the largest state parks in New Mexico, also creates space for recreationalists to enjoy hiking, cycling, fishing, and gathering along the river.
What we call today the South Valley used to be the Valley of Tehuex, which is part of the Tehuatihuato tradition. In the old testimonies of the people who lived here in the 1900s, there's still the stories about everybody getting up in the morning and singing a blessing song to bless the day. There was a different type of life that was still connected to the spirit of the water, the spirit of the wind, the spirit of the fire. All these things that today we don't have. In terms of traditional acequia culture, when I say traditional, now I'm moving to North Africa and the Muslim tradition that created this. And our cultural ways, from the acequias all the way to the Mexican tradition of cultivating, is a spiritual connection that we're not willing to let go.
In this reach, primarily we grow hay here. We don't have a lot of row crops. We do have some smaller produce farmers as well as folks that do value-added products. A lot of them are like me, where we have pasture for the fact that the water isn't as stable. We have 3 acres here on the property. I am raising livestock for milk as well as the pigs for meat. And so I usually schedule water about 21 to 25 days. I've gone as long as 49 days between irrigations just when there's less water. And I'm able to do that because I raise my livestock on permanent pasture. I actually don't cut my pastures for hay. I just graze and do a strict rotational grazing schedule.
We certainly do have some hobby farmers, but a big acreage is definitely commercial agriculture. The agricultural system in the Elephant Beat Irrigation District is authorized to serve 90,640 acres. They actually serve something like 72,000 acres because what farmers have done is they've taken the surface water that they do have and concentrated it on less acreage. And they do that for a couple of reasons. For one thing, they have less water, but also they've gone to growing higher crops than they did, say, in the drought of the 50s. It was 80%, 90% cotton. Now you've got the biggest crop is pecans, which take a whole lot more water. There's a lot of alfalfa, cotton, and then you get into a lot of the higher value specialty crops, things like chili, onions, cabbage, lettuce, the vegetable crops, and then there's small grains and things that fill it out or for a partial season. There has been some conversion of water from irrigation to municipal industrial. That started with El Paso back in the 1940s, and I would expect to see that happening in the New Mexico portion in the near future. The municipalities, mutual domestics, and the public water supply systems, they use groundwater largely that is connected, hydrologically connected to the river. So if they're to continue using more and more water all the time, I'm going to pull more and more water from the river.
The San Juan Shama project is critically important for delivering water to municipal water users in the city of Albuquerque, the city of Santa Fe, and the city of Los Alamos. This water is important for irrigators in the Middle Rio Grande Conservancy District, especially when there's insufficient water in the Rio Grande system to supply water to all of these users. Additionally, the Rio Shama is a popular place for recreation, fishing, and also an important cultural place for the people of New Mexico.
The Pecos, like all New Mexico rivers, is beloved. It's loved in the headwaters, up in the Pecos Wilderness, where I first met it, and it's loved in communities like Villanueva and others along its banks, where people fish and farm and ranch.
Today, the Rio Grande Basin in New Mexico faces many challenges. Continued aridification and forecasts that indicate a 25% reduction in runoff in the next 50 years pose serious challenges to getting water to people and ecosystems that need it. Additionally, the Rio Grande Compact and the Pecos River Compact continue to dictate flows and continue to need modifications in the form of settlements to accommodate the river as it is today. Currently, Colorado, Texas, New Mexico, and the federal government are all engaged in settlement talks, which will hopefully prevent future litigation from arising. Ultimately, all water managers along the Rio Grande Basin in New Mexico will have to find new solutions to manage water for the human and non-human communities that rely on the Rio Grande.
I'm not sure what climate change is going to do to this river and its trout fishery or its wildlife. The trout fishery is important to sustaining fish, which feed otters and sustain a lot of recreation for small towns and people along the river. I'm not sure what climate change is going to do to that, but we're really leaning hard on a lot of riverside springs in the Rio Grande Gorge to sustain a trout-friendly temperature. Trout need cold water, and there are a lot of springs in the Rio Grande Gorge up to the state line that really keep the river cool during the summer. And if the hydrology or other conditions in this canyon were to change too much to my detriment, it would be a sad thing.
We've been in this place that we call Cochiti here today since time immemorial. Pueblo people, we've learned to be sustainable, we've learned resiliency, even in the past of other drought systems. So today, as we continue to figure out how not only our Pueblo manages and stewards the resources for today in the drought that we are here in 2025, but also how we can utilize the expertise and knowledge, then we can help work and collaborate with state and federal entities in order to develop good strategies for water management, water stewardship, because in my perspective, I should say, the river is essential to our way of life as Pueblo people, not just for irrigation purposes, but for those traditional and cultural purposes. And so we like to bridge that gap and intersect our knowledge and expertise, and really encouraging tribal leadership to have that seat at the table so that that can be shared with state and federal officials.
So we have big challenges going forward in managing our relationship with this river. The first and most important one is there is less water. We're seeing less flows in the Rio Grande than we used to see. We expect over the next 50 years an additional 25% reduction or more in the flow in the Rio Grande. So figuring out as communities how we come together to share a shrinking water supply when we have competing and conflicting values, people who want to see water in the river itself for its natural beauty and environmental benefit, people who want to see green spaces in the community beyond. These are the really critical challenges we face. We also face that challenge at a time when all the infrastructure that we built over the last century is aging. Some of it is breaking down completely. El Vado Dam is currently under repair and not terribly usable. Up north of us here, upstream, the Corrales siphon, which brings irrigation water under the river to the village of Corrales and irrigators on the west side of the river, has failed. We need to replace it. We need to come up with millions of dollars to do that. So at the same time we have less water and more challenges, we also have this layer of financial challenge on top of it. Managing this river over time is going to take the collective action and the collective will of a broad community of local and state and federal government. But it poses a significant challenge because we do have a legal but also a moral obligation to get some of this water on down to the neighbors to the south of us with whom we share this river. And that, going forward, as climate change reduces the flow in the river, becomes one of our greatest challenges.
As a result of climate change, the threat number one is the lack of water. The other threat is the lack of understanding about the history and the connections to the legal aspects of acequias, right? And what that actually means for people's assets. In 1935, when the MRGDC came and signed contracts with every acequia to maintain the system and to distribute the water, there were a lot of aspects that affected these communities, from a new economy, the war that was taking place, and people having to go to work out to make money to pay newly taxes, because this was not a cash economy. The acequia culture slowly has been fading away from the memory of the people of those communities since the 1930s. Part of the problem that we have had is that all these things, water, food, are like gifts from the Creator. And so the very question to us from an ethical point of view is, what are we actually doing with the gifts that Creator or God gave us, right? And I will say that if we are honest to ourselves, we are mismanaging.
Farmers facing water shortages due to climate change and like the new climate reality that we live in now. There's less water availability, there's uncertainty in water. And so you see different types of crops that we're also planting, things that can withstand longer times. You're seeing necessarily less grass, more alfalfa, different varieties of alfalfa, as well as different, short season grasses or cool season grasses and grains, as well as making sure that our water delivery system is also becoming more efficient. We also see fallowing happening, right, where you can actually fallow your field for a year, maybe 2 years, invest that into conservation of water on your farm. Maybe you want to rest your soils for a little bit, rest your land. Maybe you want to reinvest in a better seed for the climate that we live in now. A lot of farmers say, well, we're the endangered species, but we can make good choices, I think, and work together, all of us. I think that we can all sacrifice a little bit.
We find that with the warming climate, we're getting far less than average runoff. Well, this whole project was conceived in the late 1800s, early 1900s, based on that snowmelt runoff. That's the bread and butter of the Rio Grande project. Yet we see that in years where we're getting average snowpack, we're getting maybe 25% of average runoff. And in years like this snow season just concluding now, we have a terrible snowpack and basically no spring runoff. That's why we're standing here almost in June, releasing water for the first time in the season. What we would consider normal in prior years would be beginning of March. But the fact that we've got so little water in storage, no water coming down from our spring runoff, which should run through July, we're having to run what little surface water we have sort of fast and furious to get through the hot part of the season, then we'll shut off. Before and after we have the surface water in the system, farmers are relying on groundwater. Well, that groundwater, basically the sole source of recharge for the groundwater, is the river and irrigation system. And if they don't have water in them, you're reducing the recharge. At the same time, people don't have surface water, so they turn on their wells and pump groundwater. So the groundwater is getting less recharge, greater withdrawals. It's a double whammy, as we technically say, on the aquifer system. And we can see very precipitous drops in aquifer storage in drought years like this. The difference between the management and the hydrology is pretty stark. The surface water is Rio Grande project, and EBID basically manages the New Mexico portion of the Rio Grande project from here down to El Paso. Then El Paso operates the rest of the way down. And the two really don't coordinate too much. And I think this disconnect between the management and the hydrology is how we wind up, for example, in Texas versus New Mexico.
In 2024, after an unexpected heavy precipitation event, a significant amount of sediment was flushed into the main stem of the Rio Chama south of Abiquiu Dam. This sediment caused a significant amount of flooding as it displaced water that normally travels along the main channel of the river and moved that water into the irrigated agricultural land alongside the river and in many cases into people's homes. It took almost an entire year and a series of remediation projects done in collaboration with the Army Corps of Engineers, the Bureau of Reclamation, the Middle Rio Grande Conservancy District, and the Albuquerque-Bernalillo County Water Utility Authority, all working in conjunction to remove the sediment and ultimately free up the main channel of the river. Precipitation events such as the one that caused the Rio Chama sediment plug, as it is now referred to, will likely become more common as climate change and climate variability increases. Consequences from climate change, such as the Rio Chama sediment plug, can complicate water deliveries and create further challenges in meeting Rio Grande Compact obligations. But every obligation is an opportunity in disguise.
Like all watersheds in New Mexico, the Pecos River must contend with reduced snowpack and earlier runoff. Reduced runoff, in turn, can lead to lower flows in the river. Less water in the system overall will likely impact groundwater and water management, since groundwater and surface water are managed conjunctively in New Mexico, which means that the state recognizes that they're connected, and you can think about rivers as groundwater being daylighted. In a drying climate, there may be an increased demand on already reduced flows in the Pecos River, as well as increased challenges in meeting the Pecos River Compact. South of the community of Torero, the proposed Torero mine could pose risks to the health of the Pecos watershed.
Our current hydrologic and climate realities mean that in many ways stationarity, that is, our ability to use previous models to predict the future, no longer exists. As we think about a future we can't comprehend, people across the Rio Grande Basin in New Mexico are contemplating their goals and values for the future of our shared river.
I've been a fishing guide and a fly fisherman pretty much my whole life. I grew up in New Mexico. I love New Mexico. I love this river. It's spectacular. But because I've been a fishing guide, I've been fortunate enough to fish all over the world for trout. Nevertheless, this river right here is probably my top 5 best favorite river in the world. I hope this section of the Rio Grande can maintain flows either through spring flows or through water arrangements made between the parties to the Rio Grande Compact, where each state gets a share of water that is not only what the humans require to sustain life, but also that the natural world gets its share as well. Especially in New Mexico, such a huge part of our economy relies on visitation from out of state. And the Rio Grande carries a super huge share of that load. And then we have a cultural makeup in New Mexico that also leans pretty hard on this river.
Oh, this river is so special to me. I've grown up along the Middle Rio Grande River. I'm from Cochiti all the way down south to San Felipe. The ecosystem, the holistic perspective of what the river means to me and our people, to my kids, teaching that to my kids as well. It is an essential piece of who I am, and it's been, I would say, a foundational piece for me in what I do, in my heart, as I continue to try to work with everybody, with the entire state, with the feds, with other pueblos, with our community, to ensure the stewardship and the sustainability and the respect of the river. It's a lifeblood for this Middle Rio Grande region. As my grandma from San Felipe says, it was her hope that the river would always flow, that the riparian area would be there. all the traditional and cultural uses and purposes of the river would continue to flow. All of the dynamics that happen in this stretch of the river, the eddies that happen, the hydraulic jumps, the hydraulic falls, all of the riparian area, the cottonwoods, the animals, the vegetation, to be thriving and resilient and sustainable for this portion of the river. And at some point, the dam has a life. It was constructed with a 100-year life. So at some point in the future, will there be a dam? I don't know. But we need to continue to plan and look ahead so that this river at some point can flow like it did 100 years ago.
The priorities that we have today versus the priorities that our kids will have in the future. And we have to be sincere to ourselves and say, are we leaving something for them to have? My hope for the future is that we will do a good job in planting seeds. We're working with the schools. We want to plant seeds upon understanding the cycles of the earth. Acequia Limpias, where we bring out students, families, we're reviving a way of living that is attached to the understanding of acequias. So why makes it this special? Because here we have an opportunity to bring all those feelings back. Acequias are communal. So we hope that 30 years from now, there will be more young people who have great understanding about those things.
I love this part of the river. I think it really brings the community together. I hope that we can continue having a river that's sustainable in itself, sustainable for the farmers that rely on it, the species that use it, as well as the individuals who just enjoy the river for the river itself. I see the value of farming, not just of what the farm can give to me through the food that it provides, but also ensuring that I can be a caretaker of the land, and that's something that was instilled in me as a very young kid. I don't see myself as like, this is my land, but I am the steward of this land, and I am the caretaker of this land, and if I take care of this land, it will take care of me in return. Same thing with the animals. Good animal husbandry is really important, and making sure that my animals are healthy, well taken care of. And I just find that the more that you put into the land and your farm and your animals and livestock, the more that they give back to you.
For most of the time I lived in Las Cruces, I lived right on the river, and my kids grew up playing in it. So it's very much a part of my career, my interest, but also my family. I hope that people can be realistic and lower their expectations with the available water supply. It's a different river at this point. So I'm hoping that people can be responsible stewards of the water, understand that this is real. It's not a bunch of hysterical academics, it's reality. I've watched it happen for 30 years, the decline in the water supply here. And I hope that what they can do is adapt the culture. You know, New Mexican culture has always adapted. I hope we can adapt to it intelligently and do it through identifying our common values and adjusting our use of water to fit the supply consistent with those shared values. I hope that we can rethink the way that we govern water in the state, because what we have now is governance paradigm that is based on plentiful water and trying to encourage expanded use of it for economic generation. That's not the situation we're in now. We're in a declining supply, and we need to recognize that and manage it appropriately. The ecosystem of the river, it's going to adapt the way nature does things, and that can be pretty stark and unpleasant, but it's going to happen, and that's another area where I hope we can be intelligent about it. I see we're going to have to design mechanisms into our physical and institutional infrastructure to better be able to maintain some semblance of habitat for as long as possible.
We have the opportunity to share with one another what we value and love about this river and figure out how to manage it with less water now and into the future.
all, we could take a quick stretch break. I know that's a long time to stay sitting. And then if you're a panelist, as in your name is on this sheet, you know who you are, come on down and we can figure out seating. For those of you online, we're gonna pivot to a Q&A portion. If you would like to ask a question, I have the chat pulled up. Go ahead and drop a question in the chat and I will ask it to our panelists. I genuinely forgot like 98% of that. I was like, what even is this now? No, but the microphone is right here, so we should be fine. Tony thinks we'll be fine. I'm manifesting fineness. Here. I don't mind it. You can pick a seat, whichever seat you would like. Oh, great. I originally had you in alphabetical order.
This time Phoebe. The pig's name is Phoebe.
I love snoring. I love that.
When we watched it with
I just wrote you a nice note, Stephanie. That's the extent of it. On the note cards that you purchased. All right, don't be shy. If your name is up here, come join me down here.
I love your animals. Sorry, Tay.
I might need
Okay, I was telling Phoebe the pig's name is also Phoebe.
Yeah. Phoebe, I'm glad you were able to come.
No, sorry, I realized. Really, like I said, I'm zooming in from Bernalillo.
Oh, that's fun.
I think, yeah. Pretty good. This is for you.
Oh,
And this
Go
is
ahead. Good to see you again. Good to see you again. Yeah.
I'll trade you. That one says Phil, but this one says Jorge. So. This is for you. Right here. You have to sit down here.
I wasn't happy because so many people usually just start going
I'm gonna stand right here. I promise I'm not hiding. I just want to make sure that everybody who's online can hear the questions repeated. So we are super lucky to have so many of the interviewees from the video here with us today. Thank you all for being here. I want to start off. I get the privilege of asking the first question because I'm the one doing the moderating. I want to know what you all think our data needs are. When we think about water in the future of New Mexico, we think about managing the Rio Grande. What data information do we need to effectively manage the river going forward?
Can I start?
Yeah, please.
Because I was like the philosophy major, so you should not. I said I was going to start, and I also made the self-deprecating joke that I was the philosophy major, and so you should not necessarily look to me to answer the data questions. But as we look going forward at the challenge of managing under increasing scarcity, and this is something that I work on a lot with the students that I work with at the University of New Mexico, I am concerned at the ways in which water is used in our communities, ways in which it transpires into the atmosphere and doesn't flow on downstream, the things that we are not measuring. The domestic wells, I think, are an incredibly important thing. Evaporative losses in the system that don't fit into the measurement tools that we have, and so we end up like the old joke about the drunk looking for his keys under the street light, and you ask the drunk, was that where he lost them? And the answer is, well, no, but that's the only place there's any light. And so I think broadening our conception of what is the water we're trying to measure and understand as we try to figure out how to share increasingly scarce resources is an important thing. But there's real scientists sitting around me who may have.
I'm not a scientist, I'm an engineer.
Oh.
But some of you may have seen the recently published Groundwater 360 report. I'll try to reach the back there. Turn up your hearing aids, John. But it's a big call for aquifer mapping and characterization, certainly metering and monitoring, and those foundations, of course, make it possible to create models. None of those manage water. What they do is they inform the management of water, and so even if you had perfect data, you still have to make politically unpopular decisions in a declining water supply. One part of the state that's very near and dear to my heart, the Lower Rio Grande, we've got groundwater monitoring going back to the 1940s, extensive networks. We've got John Hawley's recently published report on the Mesilla Basin that takes it all the way back to the beginning. We've got, metering order in place since the late 2000s, and we still wind up in Texas versus New Mexico. I will say that we would not have settled Texas versus New Mexico without that information background. We would have gone to trial and figuring out, we were in it for a decade and change, figure 2 decades, and probably a very much less livable conclusion to it. So the information, the knowledge is necessary, but not sufficient.
I can move to another question, or someone else can.
No, I'd like to go next. I'd like to go next because, this discussion about data has been going on for a while. Last year there was a lot of emphasis on let's get more money to the state engineer, let's get data. But data for what? I mean, it seems to me that it's very clear that water is diminishing. The concern that I personally have is that, yeah, it would be nice to be able to measure the amount of water that we're taking, but something that we don't talk about is food security. What kind of, how much water are we going to need in the future to feed ourselves? If that was the reality, the situation that we will have to confront, then how do we solve that? We're not necessarily, in my view, we're not necessarily thinking about how are we going to sustain ourselves. We're thinking about how can we sustain the level of living and development that we have done for the last, since the new time, no? Since this modern U.S. time. And to me, that's where the problem resides. We're not thinking about ourselves. We're thinking about how do we continue abusing the river without regards of how our future kids are actually going to sustain themselves.
So we have a question here in the chat asking if stormwater harvesting projects could play a role in future river management? I know there's some restrictions on stormwater harvesting, especially when it comes to compact obligations, but does anyone have any thoughts on that?
I think as things get drier, like what we saw this last summer, every bit counts, right? So I think that really understanding the stormwater, I think understanding wastewater return, I dare say, is really important that we look at all these sources and try to patch from, and I look at it through an ecosystem lens, but with ag and municipal and other uses wrapped into that. But I think that we need to value all these sources and look at what the river looks like when it's real bare bones.
I'll add to that as well. Sorry, I have an ear infection, so I can't hear very well, but I hope you can hear me. I think
you need to use your outdoor voice.
Yeah. I think with stormwater, any stormwater that we can capture would be great, but also making sure that we can slow it down as well, so it doesn't also damage our communities, right? So we see like the Valencia County Arroyo Flood Control Authority that just was passed and created and has a new board in Valencia County. We don't have a flood control authority at all in Socorro County. And so how, if we don't have those parameters or those entities available, like we do at ABCWA and SCAFCA, right, in Sandoval County, it's, we have to have those structures in place in order to also capture that water, and in order to also capture the data as well, I think, so, yeah.
But one of the things that's really important that we need to remember when we think about, for example, stormwater or wastewater reuse is that we need to pay attention to where that water is going now and what it is doing. So stormwater often is what's contributing flow to the river for the birds and the fish and the people downstream. Wastewater from municipal wastewater treatment plants is often an extremely significant contributor to flows in the river downstream at the point at which it's diverted. So we have to be careful that we don't think of things like wastewater or reuse or stormwater as free water. You also have to think about, well, where's that water going now and what it's doing, and what will be lost if we divert it to some other use. You need to remember that we're diverting it from its current place to some other use.
Don't be shy. Yeah.
With apologies to my friend the engineer down on the panel, what I take away from the documentary and from the discussion so far is that for more than a century we've dealt with challenges associated with water supply on the river from engineering. Right? We know how to move water, we know how to store water, we know how to treat and reuse water, we know how to pump water. But at the risk of sounding like a hysterical academic, I wonder if we're kind of reaching the limit of a purely engineering sort of solution to what's coming. And the philosopher on the panel has had a front row seat to what has gone on the Colorado River system. And for all the talk of shared values, that's gotten nasty. And so I wonder if the smart people sitting down there, much smarter than I am, could give recommendations for what sort of, real policy changes, as in like laws and compacts and things. Do we need to just revisit the actual laws that govern our management of the river? And can we do that within the state of New Mexico, or does it need to be compact-wide like they're frantically trying to do in the Colorado? Sorry for the rant.
Well, let me go first.
Sure.
That's what you're. There was a time when people and this lady could attest to this, had a relationship with the water, with the river, when those things were alive. But when the modern time came with the industrial impulse and this idea of big money in agriculture or industrial agriculture, you know, I always say it. It's not that we lost our way. It's that the newcomers never bothered to understand the nature of the water and the systems in this place. And so, yeah, exceptional engineering systems, a way of thinking and controlling and diverting, yeah, that's easy to do. That's actually not difficult at all if you come to think about. What is difficult is for us to continue to have a relationship with the river and the water that would actually allows us to continue sustaining ourselves, and that is not the case.
Yeah, and yet, sorry, but if we think about the last 25 years, you know, the course of the 21st century at a municipal level, cities all across the Southwest, certainly including Albuquerque, really have been successful in convincing a bunch of newcomers to, in aggregate, cut down on their water use. That's been a huge municipal water management success. And so we could reframe my question as saying, is there some way to replicate that kind of success for the river as a whole, going beyond the cities?
So
I'm just asking questions, I don't have the answer.
So I'm lost on this one, Dave. Obviously, the governance suggestions that I've been advocating for a number of years are failing completely. So I approach this with some humility, but I'm reminded of this really interesting quote from Joseph Burkholder, who was the engineer who designed the first wave of plumbing in the Middle Rio Grande Valley in the 1920s. And what Burkholder said was, the engineering's the easy part. This challenge of coming together as human communities to act collectively in the face of shared, sometimes competing and conflicting values, to bring the values piece in to create governance structures, that's the hard part. And if I had something to say here that would answer your question, if we just did X, I'm lost. I don't know.
I think we do somewhat shortage share, you know, under AWRM, Active Water Resources Management here. We also have to remember that we're an unadjudicated system here in the Middle Valley, and even in lieu of having an adjudication, right, under MRGCD, under the Conservancy Act, we already have the ability to shortage share, and that's what we do. So, you know, other than P&P water, other than prior impairment water, any non-Pueblo users, you know, share in the shortages already. But of course, we're still constrained by the compact. Now, should we reopen the compact? Probably not. You know, I don't know anybody who would want to in New Mexico, anyways. You know, maybe it favored for other states, but you know, that's just one opinion, of course. But you know, I think we have the ability here in New Mexico under AWRM to share in the shortages a little differently. I know on the video, right, I said I went 40 days. I went 80 days after this filming with irrigation. So, I mean, it's just a tough situation, of course, that we're in with less water, you know, but we have other individuals who still, you know, went more days than I, right? Especially looking at Corrales, right? Oh.
I'm going to pivot to a question from the chat, and then we'll go back to the audience. So there's a question in the chat, and I'm going to paraphrase here. But folks are wondering, and Phoebe, you might be best suited to answer this question. Folks are wondering what a future in the Middle Rio Grande might look like without reservoirs and dams the way we have them currently, and what a pathway towards that might be.
Yeah, well, thanks for that question. And I'm just kind of absorbing some of the insight that is shared by everybody, and some thoughts. And so, even in watching the show, as I was kind of feeling the room, if you will, and I was wondering what folks take from a show like this and what aspects and what your perspectives are. We all come from different perspectives. And so with that said, engineer, acequia, farmers, conservationists, others, journalist, professor, philosophy, right? I think one thing, I have a master's in engineering. I never took the PE exam. I was like right there. So I love engineering. I love differential equations. If I could do that all day, I would be actually happy. But the hard part is how we work together. And I think from my perspective of how I was raised, our Pueblo people we're taught to respect. We're taught to see the whole picture. Like, respect the whole picture, even though we may not be responsible for the whole picture, if you will. So we might have lawyers, like if I can translate this, and I'll get to the actual question here, but this is the context of my answer. So, each one of us at the Pueblo, if you've ever been to a feast day, there's like dancers, there's singers, there's people watching, there's some ladies cooking. Some of us wear two hats and we cook and dance, and there's people that make the songs, there's people that are the drummer, there's like all of these different hats, right? And so, like I said, some may wear multiple hats. People who make that whole event, right? So we need everybody to make it whole, to make the whole, with all the blessings. So it's about the process. I think we were talking about, it's about the process. Even when you farm and you get your field ready, it's about the process. And I think for me, one of the messages is it's about the process. And it's gonna be hard work. There's not a silver bullet answer to anything of this, but that's okay. I think, because that's what I've been taught. Like, we gotta work hard. And we also have to respect all of the different perspectives of how we navigate the water issues and how we address them. But if we lose the respect, to Jorge's point, if we lose that connection and not understanding or disregard, we run into a point where, as my papa always told me, like, you can come up with a solution, you can come up with an answer that you think is a silver bullet, like a big dam like we have at Cochiti. You think that's gonna fix all the flooding in the Middle Rio Grande. We may go down, and it may be a interim solution based upon 20 years of data. How do you build something and say that's the solution when you have 20, maybe even 40 years of data when that dam was conceived? And you just regard thousands of years of data. But those people that had thousands of years of data were not at the table to inform, whoa, hey, did you think about this? Did you think about that? Right? So what are we gonna value as we go forward, whether it's new projects, new ideas, or how do we take care of, maybe, as my papa would say, maybe you go off the path, and here is the balance point, right? And you've gone way out of balance. How are you gonna get back to that balance? Because in order for us to be sustainable going forward, we need balance. And that changes, and that requires work all the time. And that's scary when people say, Phoebe, just give me an answer. And the answer is, it's gonna be work. My kids ask me all the time, like, Mama, can we make it easy? And so we have to capture data. We have to be enlightened as we move forward. And data and understanding the world and the complexities. Like if I sit alone, and as I said in the video, I love to sit there at the river. And like I said, there is so much dynamic happening within one stretch of the river. From an ecosystem point to hydraulics, hydrology, what's happening, what time of day, how hot it is, what happened yesterday, like all of these aspects, the soils, the rocks. So how do we inform good decision making going forward? So it is about the data, but also looking beyond, as Mr. Fleck was saying, it's where's the light shining? So when we focus, I think my hesitancy, like my papa or my ta'o would say, their hesitancy would be like, once you start honing in on what you can measure, you forget about the other pieces. And that's scary. When you focus on one thing and then you forget about everything else, you may know a lot about that little piece of the pie, but you don't know about what we need to consider to ensure that whatever we go forward in collectively will be well informed, will be based on that data that we have access to because there's people living that might carry that data. So it's a collective, and it is hard to do that work. So, but that's okay, I think, because they said if it's hard, then that means you care. And it's that connection of caring, whether it's about doing differential equations, what I love, and getting to an answer after 10 pages. I love it, but it is going to be hard. And I guess in terms of the answer to the question is, so the context is like, there will be different points in the future. And as I said in the video, where Cochiti Dam is, we'll have to revisit. And other structures along the way, up and down the river, we'll have to revisit.
Can I add? Let's say I'm a student and I know nothing, I just started, right? So the 1,000 years, okay, I find incredibly intriguing. Is that lost data? Is it, how available is it? Is there pushback to like, no, we know better because we're smarter now, which we're not, okay? Can you lobby to utilize the old data to maybe fix problems that we have? Because
to that point, and I think I showed it in the
video. It's a situation. I mean, the Colorado River thing. I mean, this is not funny. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think part of it is like, is having those seats at the table to share that wisdom and that data and that information is critical.
So were you maybe intrigued by the word lobby because isn't that how stuff gets done in this country?
There's a couple other questions in the room and we're almost out of time, so I would encourage you to stay afterwards to chat with Phoebe, but I want to make sure we just to a couple other people. I saw Mindy's and John's hands. Mindy's, do you want to go first?
Yeah, first, Bryn, I just want to congratulate you. It's amazing. I can really see seniors in classrooms and other event situations that was available. So thank you to all the panelists for participating and making it, and for you for producing it. That's so fantastic. So thank you for spending time about it. It's just so really great. I want to build up to the hysterical Dennis mentioned, and be hysterical myself for a second. And then ask you all questions, because I feel like, there are already a lot of tools that are available within the existing water law to address some issues that Dave mentioned, that we're unwilling to do. Like prohibitions against waste, like really defining what beneficial use really means in this new age. So like one of my questions for maybe John or some others, maybe our former engineers, like why are we using those definitions of beneficial use in new and innovative ways, or even in some more conventional ways to actually take on these challenges, because those do exist within the existing water law. So I think we do have existing tools. But then, I think another comment, and I want to thank Stephanie for her comment about, the sharing of water, and that there is water sharing that's happening because of shortage. And at the same time, in this recent shortage, as we recognize, the river is not sharing during this time. And we do not currently have within our current mechanism of water law in New Mexico at least a way for the river to be recognized. And Laura Pascas, I don't think Laura's here, so I just have to say, if you are not currently on her Substack, there's a free version, please get on it. She's making a really eloquent argument for water rights, for the recognition for the river right now, that's really eloquent and important, and the mechanisms for that. And my question for all of you as panelists is as remarkable as this was, I feel like one answer that I'm looking at increasingly is that one of our challenges is we're looking at one type of problem at a time. We're looking just at water here. We're not looking at the trees. We're not looking at the watershed. We're not looking at the land, and the way in which we're managing the urban landscape, the agricultural landscape, talking about what people are growing. We're not talking about the different other interrelated issues of land, air, water, air, that we have in integrating our policies. So, climate change is changing the forest system in ways that it's going to shift our systems in ways. So, do you have any insights related to how we can do better related to sort of netting all of this and taking on this challenge in a more complex way?
I'll give an answer from an educator's point of view, no? So, to answer your question and to go to your point, so when the as a judge from the highest court told me once, don't come and argue with your traditional knowledge. This is an Anglo-Saxon judiciary system. So when the Angles came here, as she said, they didn't bother to ask anybody anything. All the plans were made to fit the needs of the new industrial and very, very selfish and crazy society. So all the thinking that people had put on actually sustaining themselves went out the door. So the question to me is, how do we repair that? How do we repair a consciousness that goes to the land? Because that's what we should be caring about more than anything else. And we're not. We're not. We want to, you know what we want data for? And you know why we want to clean water? So we can use more water to either do more chips or invite other industries. That's what we want more water. There is no talk about let's have more water so we can actually grow better food for ourselves. Think about it. The culprit number one in New Mexico is a small farmer, according to Mr. Quesada. Tonto cabrón. And yet, we consume less than 5% of the food that we actually eat. We cultivate less than 5% of the food we eat. So if that is the case, then what's going on? We look at the graphs and what is it? 78% always jumps in the agriculture. But where's the food? Because we're not horses, right? And sure, pecans probably don't even stay here. Also, that's so those are the things. So what do we need to do? We need to raise consciousness, right? I'm sure that the pueblos are doing it. We are doing it. We are creating programs. And we have a thing called the curriculum called Ciclos de la Tierra that is reintroducing the knowledge of the Indo-Hispano people from here back into the schools. And yeah, we're starting. But that's what we need to do. We need to think about it. In 25 years, there will be 25% less than the water that we have right now. What does that mean? Less food? And then the temperature is going to increase. Less food, more diseases, and a world that is going crazy by the minute. So in 25 years, the little kids that are actually running around all happy in the schools, you know, your grandsons, your kids, they're the ones who are really gonna have to figure it out. We're only talking a little bit of crap because we're not doing really much other than nesting for data. So I say we need to raise consciousness so the new society that came and established here can actually learn what it needed to learn all the way from the beginning, and it didn't. Why? Because racism, prejudice, and plain stupidity. Plain stupidity.
Thanks, buddy.
That's the one thing you can't
Paul,
fix.
I feel like your perspective on this is just a little bit different. We've spent a lot of time talking about the agro-ecosystem and how there's a way forward that involves kind of water for everyone. Can you speak to that just a little bit?
I guess I really enjoy what Jorge said, and I think that there is a, this idea. I think the way water has been managed typically has been in silos, right? Like how much does the ag need? How much does the compact need? How much do the cities need? And then how much does the silver men need, right? So seeing it as a system, seeing it as a system, including the watersheds, right? The whole system is really the way we need to go. So I do. The shift in consciousness, I do think it's happening. I think the younger generations is much more in line with viewing it as a system. And just there's examples of, how there's interweave of irrigation and the river. It's not like the river's here and the farms are there. It's much more interdependent. So, yeah.
Thank you. I know, John Hawley, you've had your hand up for a very long time.
I'm interested in some people who are not here. Who are they? Are there any legislative people here in this room who are county commissions or state representatives or anybody? Are they here?
We have one elected, at least one elected.
Oh, yeah.
Seriously?
The county, counties here who just voted a multi-million-dollar package for a fake scam called Project Jupiter. Are they here?
I don't know that they're on our mailing list.
They're going to get you and watch their ads on television. How Project Jupiter, it's like hearing the justification for the war in Vietnam, war in Iran. It's not. I'm a 93-year-old guy who moved to Las Cruces in 1962 and raised my family there. That's all if you want to know, Bill King mentioned, I've got a book out on just published by the Water Resources Institute on the 75-author book on the water resources of northern Chihuahua, West Texas, and the Pasilla Valley region. And what we do, I'm a geologist. I work for the New Mexico Bureau of Mines. And they said, why is a geologist in water working for the Bureau of Mines? Because we do one thing very well. We mine water. We mine water. We don't conserve it, we mine it.
Yeah, and I just want to add that we think about rivers as pipelines and bringing us water, and I just want to pull out that example of the Chama and the sediment plug, that we've done a lot of engineering, but we forget that rivers are still rivers with these multiple pieces that, sediment and flows and plants and fish and birds. And so I guess I would ask all of us to think about that will be our challenge going forward, is to grow our knowledge of understanding complex systems and how to also take care of our rivers. So they function as rivers and still are able actually to be part of our lives as well, providing water to us.
How about extending a relationship to the river so it can be your relative, and then you will really take care of it? That's what we need to learn.
I think that's a perfect place to stop. I know we're a couple minutes over. Thank you everybody for coming. If you have questions for our individual panelists, you should reach out to them or come find them as they're leaving, torment them on the way to the car. I just want another big round of applause for everyone who put effort into this event. I also want to extend a special thank you to Amari Becker, our videographer, filmmaker, cinematographer extraordinaire, who's not here, but did a wonderful job. And then a big thank you to everyone at the Utton Center, our director, Adrian Oglesby, our ombudsman, Stephanie Russo-Baca, and our admin, Cyrus Perez Gomez, who's wandering back there. Thank you all. Remember, this is the Leave No Trace event. There's a trash can outside the southern doors on your right-hand side. Thank you all so much for coming. I really appreciate it.